battlefields, wrote Scott Fitzgerald, my lovely, safe world blew itself up. Terrible twilight of an old world, noisy dawn of our times. This was World War I. It was the last time you could look at the face of war and see the features of men. This is the kind of war it would be. The machines were starting to emerge. Along with the names of victims, they would rub out old codes that men had lived by and fought by. After this ship, the Lusitania, there would be no unbreakable rules of war. There would be many other victims, the litter of a primitive D-Day at a remote peninsula called Gallipoli. This is the Austrian battleship St. Stefan, sinking in the Adriatic only months before the armistice. No orders to abandon ship from its captain. It was an age when commanders could take men to their deaths in the name of nothing but honor. In this war, empires clashed. George V's England would survive, though shaken. Kaiser Wilhelm's Germany would crumble. Doomed also, the Romanovs, absorbed in themselves while Russia seethed with change. And the Habsburgs, the antique dynasty of Austria-Hungary. Of the world these kings had inherited, only shadows and echoes would be handed on to us. The echoes would become an overture, the noise of revolution and change. In Winston Churchill's words, not armies, but whole nations broke and ran. Out of the crowds, new faces would appear. A magnetic orator named Lenin. In the trappings of a hero, an Air Force officer named Hermann Goering. Hindenburg, a general who would retire to a presidency. An unsuccessful war leader, Churchill. Europe's first American war hero, General Pershing. His ally and antagonist, Foch. Britain's Prime Minister, Lloyd George. France's old tiger, Clemenceau. Mr. Herbert Hoover of Belgian War Relief. Mr. Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the Navy Department. Old soldier-to-be, Colonel Douglas MacArthur. A young ace, Baron von Richthofen, and Captain Eddie Rickenbacker. These were the years when war ventured into a new battleground, the air, and produced a new breed of heroes, the last champions of individual combat. Their time would be brief. They, too, would be overtaken by their machines. Heroes of this war, some known, some nameless, would keep searching for answers to its hazards. There would be no answer except man's power to endure his follies. Behind its president, Woodrow Wilson, a young nation would march to war in the footsteps of the Allies and emerge as their leader. This is the kind of war it would be, a cataclysm. It begins with 2 warning shots fired in the summer of 1914 at a place called Sarajevo. Europe in the vintage year of 1914. Europe in a time of splendid transition, of automobiles with liveried footmen, of absolute monarchs and general strikes. It has been a year of strikes. There has been a decade of war threats and brinkmanship. But it is an age of confidence, which takes crisis in its stride. Men are reasonable, progress continues, peace seems permanent. What spoiled children we are, a Paris editorialist writes, in the last week of June 1914. June 28th in London. King George V and Queen Mary on a short drive to Kensington Palace for a Sunday visit with their relatives. June 28th in St. Petersburg. Tsar Nicholas II holding court at the Romanovs' summer palace. June 28th at Kiel, Germany. Kaiser Wilhelm II at the official opening of the widened Kiel Canal. He takes a salute of friendship from British ships at the ceremonies. In the small Slavic kingdom of Serbia in the Balkans, June 28th is a holiday, festive, patriotic, lively with the spirit of Slav nationalism. Across the border from Serbia is Bosnia, also inhabited by Slavs, but occupied by the alien empire of Austria-Hungary. This is the provincial capital, Sarajevo, June 28, 1914. The distinguished visitor in the plumed hat is Archduke Franz Ferdinand, nephew and heir to the Emperor of Austria-Hungary. The Archduke's wife, Sophia, is with him. Minutes before, a bomb was thrown at their car. At the City Hall, they report the ugly incident. From here, they will drive on into the path of calamity, a street where a boy stands armed with a pistol. Two shots end the lives of the Archduke and his wife. The assassin is a tubercular high school student named Gavrilo Princip, a Slav patriot inspired and armed by a Serbian agent. Sarajevo is ransacked by Austrian occupation troops, while the bodies of the victims are shipped home to Vienna, to a funeral without pomp or tears. A lifelong disappointment to his uncle, the Emperor, the Archduke will hardly be missed. In the words of a Viennese writer, Stefan Zweig, he lacked everything that counts in Austria, amiability and charm. In Vienna, the crowd will gather not for the victims, but for a rare view of the old emperor, Franz Josef, now 84, who comes into the city from his summer palace, but will not attend the funeral. The funeral barely interrupts the music in the cabarets. But behind the scenes, tragedy is being turned into opportunity by Austria's foreign minister, Count Leopold von Berchtold, and the military chief, General Franz Conrad von Hetzendorf. From the German Kaiser, Austria's ally, they get assurances of support for any measures they may take to punish what he calls this detestable crime. After handing over this blank check, the Kaiser allows himself to be hustled off on his usual summer cruise by his Chancellor Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg. Everything will be taken care of. There is no reason to change plans. No reason for any of Europe's rulers to change plans. In the English Channel off Spithead, King George proceeds with his own summer routine, the annual review of the fleet. St. Petersburg, the Tsar entertains a summer guest, Raymond Poincaré, President of the French Republic. A ceremonial visit between allies. Sarajevo has disappeared from the headlines. Society has set out on its circuit of leisure with government officials among the crowds. Europe's less leisurely millions will satisfy themselves with an occasional Sunday at the beach. The weather is marvelous. On July 21st, an American tourist, Colonel Edward House, sails home with his earlier anxieties relieved. Europe, he has written to his friend, President Woodrow Wilson, is wrapped up in sports and social doings. People are talking about the recent regatta at Henley, won for the first time by an American crew, the Harvard boat captained by a young Bostonian named Leverett Saltonstall. Everywhere, the omens are peaceful. Everywhere except in Vienna. On July 23rd, the Austrian leaders execute the scheme they started weeks before. They persuade Emperor Franz Joseph to sign a harsh document. Punish Serbia, and he will crush the Slav nationalist movement that has been gnawing at the southern provinces of his empire. Suddenly, Europe rings with a dread word of alarm. Ultimatum. The ultimatum is only a formality. Vienna is preparing to act no matter what the response. Serbia, under its young regent, Prince Alexander, in effect agrees to Austria's terms, but nevertheless calls up its troops. Europe, secure, self-satisfied Europe, is stepping toward the brink. In late July 1914, the Tsar appears in St. Petersburg before an agitated crowd. The small Slavic country of Serbia has been threatened. Russia, the big brother of Slav nations, is aroused. The slogan, in the streets and in government, support our ally Serbia. Now, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, alerted by the sounds of gathering crisis, cuts his cruise short and hurries back to Berlin, an unsuspecting captive of his advisors. The text of Serbia's soft reply to the Austrian ultimatum is kept from him, in order to leave Austria free to act. As big powers are drawn in, the diplomatic channels begin to flood with activity. Berlin to Vienna, Belgrade to St. Petersburg, to Paris. On July 27th in Berlin, government leaders report to the Kaiser in a special crisis session. That same day in London, a voice of moderation speaks up. Sir Edward Grey, England's languid foreign secretary, urges Berlin to mediate between the principals. But the message is ignored. On July 28th, convinced that outsiders will back off, Austria takes the ultimate step: war against Serbia. From the Danube River dividing the two countries, Austrian gunboats shell the Serb capital of Belgrade. With war on in the Balkans, the Tsar is urged to mobilize his armies. He stalls, orders a limited call-up, initiates a desperate correspondence with the Kaiser. I shall be overwhelmed by pressure. Do what you can. Signed, your loving Nicky. The answer from Berlin. I fully understand. I am exerting my utmost influence. Signed, your devoted friend and cousin, Willy. But it is too late. The pressure too strong. Convinced by his ministers that Germany is getting ready to strike, the Tsar orders all-out mobilization. Now, all over Europe, the crowd rises to the allure of war. The war fever rages, and even the intellectuals are not immune. German novelist Thomas Mann will embrace the war as a purification, a liberation, an enormous hope. English novelist H.G. Wells, defeat Germany for the sake of peace and disarmament throughout the world. Dr. Sigmund Freud of Vienna, all my libido is given to Austria-Hungary. A few speak in revulsion. Albert Einstein deplores this species which boasts of its freedom of will and yet makes war. But now, war is Europe's will. In Berlin, the war spirit is inflamed by the movement of Russian troops toward German borders. A fatal mechanism is turned on. The clockwork of war plans. Timed, ready. On August 1st, the clock strikes. The Kaiser summons his nation to war. Against Russia. But the first objective on the timetable is Russia's ally, France. France, confronted with a brutal German ultimatum, tempted by an opportunity to regain its lost territories of Alsace-Lorraine. France gets ready for a German attack. Announced by ultimatum, it will come by way of neutral Belgium. France and Belgium, Russia and Germany, Serbia and Austria. Before it is over, 7/8 of the world's population will take sides in the war. England watching apprehensively from the sidelines. For England, the issues are defined by the First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill. We could not allow the German fleet to come down the channel to attack the French ports. But in addition, we were morally committed. Only Britain could defend the fair play of the world. Churchill has already deployed the fleet against surprise attack. Now the government, under Prime Minister Herbert Asquith, sends Germany an ultimatum in behalf of France and Belgium. For 5 hours, Britain waits for an answer, which never comes. On August 5th, Britain joins the nations on the march to war. In these crowds will later recall their feelings with wonder and horror. The mood of a schoolboy holiday, the relief that is almost a rapture, and the confidence. Paris in 6 weeks, Christmas in Berlin. Only the leaders seem to waver. The Kaiser tells his generals when it is too late, "Gentlemen, you will regret this." And Sir Edward Grey of England utters a phrase that will haunt the world for a generation. The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime. Years later, after the 9 million deaths, the 37 million casualties, after the crash of empires, the upheaval of whole societies, years later, a member of the Austrian royal family will say, "This is not what the leaders intended. What they had in mind was a limited war."